So it's time to play another round of Person at the Daily Wire Doesn't Understand Something. And in this case, we're going to talk about Brett Cooper's inability to understand this recent Anne Frank film that has been released. It's an animated film called Where is Anne Frank? I've been trying to find it to watch it streaming, and I cannot find it anywhere. In fact, the various websites that tell you where to find something streaming online say that it's not streaming anywhere. And I can't find any physical copies of it either. I would like very much to see it if anybody knows where I can see it. That said, I've looked into it, researched about it, read about it, watched clips from it and everything, and also on top of that, Brett Cooper's objections to the film can be put to bed with just a little bit of historical understanding of what happened in the Holocaust and in World War II and that sort of thing. So, in the idea behind this Where is Anne Frank movie is that it's an animated film where if you've read Anne Frank's diary, you know that she wrote to she wrote her diary as if she were speaking to an imaginary friend named Kitty. And in the film, Kitty comes to life in modern times and gets to, as kind of an apparition, and gets to see the modern how the modern world understands and remembers Anne Frank, and kind of goes on this mission to make the point of, hey, Anne Frank is not somebody, Anne Frank is not just something some person you read about in school. This is something that should change your life. It should change how you think about the world. It should change how you see the world. So that's the premise of the film. Brett Cooper starts in her commentary, which I'll link to in the description. She starts crowing about how and people are calling it the woke Anne Frank movie, and she calls it woke and says that it's woke because it tries to draw a parallel between refugees being expelled from refuge countries. From their refuge countries and what was going on in Nazi Germany in World War II, and Brett Cooper tries to say, well, that's not as bad. What they're dealing with isn't as bad as the Holocaust. How can you compare that to the Holocaust? Okay, try to understand it's just a very simple understanding of how things developed in Germany. First of all, if you've taken any world history course in school in the Western world, you have studied the Holocaust. And very likely, at some point, someone in your class turned into Captain Hindsight and put up his hand and said, well, why didn't they just leave? Okay. Well, first of all, yes, that's a reasonable question, but it's not like you're the first person to ever think of this. Certainly, they did try to leave. There were a lot of people who either Jewish and non-Jewish alike who tried to leave the Nazi-occupied parts of Europe early on. There were a number of people who did not anticipate it getting as bad as it did not. Decided to stay and thought that it would, the whole thing would eventually blow over before it got too terrible to live, before it became unlivable, that sort of thing. There were those people who unfortunately made some very bad decisions, but the reality is that a great many people, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jews, tried to get out of Nazi-occupied Europe. As things were getting worse and worse. And one of the big problems that they were running into was immigration. Now, there were countries that took in Jews that were trying to escape from Nazi Germany, but time and again, what they would run into in all of these countries is that none of these countries were prepared to or willing to take in the entire Jewish population of Nazi-occupied Germany for the especially because for a certain time period while all this was going on, the United States had not even entered World War II yet, so they were not even taking part in it. But they kept running into issues with immigration. To use the United States as an example, the United States had 27,000 visas available for refugees, and because of the mass exodus, pun somewhat intended, from Nazi-occupied Europe, they had over 300,000 applicants. So they simply refused to take all of the people that were trying to escape to the United States. And this is where Brett Cooper's very limited understanding, very conservative worldview fails her, because you have to realize, just like, there are people Brett Cooper's age who adopt extremely idealistic leftist worldviews, and they start shouting for communism, and they have a cognitive dissonance and a confirmation bias that will not allow them to understand the brutal and bloody reality of communism, of things like Maoist China and the Soviet Union, and currently with North Korea and things like that. They don't understand and won't understand how bad communism actually is. They just think they found this utopian worldview and start going crazy for it. Brett Cooper's the same way in the right-wing direction. She is very young, very naive, and I don't think really grasps conservative thinking well enough to understand the flaws in it. And if you truly understand anything that you are, any political stance, any worldview that you have, you don't truly understand it until you're able to articulate the flaws in it. And so she really doesn't understand the reality, the limitations of conservatism and the flaws of it. And this is evidence as to why, because you have to remember, the Daily Wire loves to say, oh, we have all kinds of different worldviews, and we get together and talk about them and laugh about our different worldviews. They have degrees of difference within the larger agreement that they all have. There's no one at the Daily Wire that's pro-choice. There's no one at the Daily Wire, as far as I know, that's pro-gay marriage. There's no, they are broadly in agreement on the issues, and it's the minute inner workings of those issues that they disagree on. Well, with the immigration policy, so the Daily Wire gang is very consistent in their immigration views, and basically, if they had their way, the entire United States would be under a giant glass dome, and we'd just be pointing middle fingers at the rest of the world, telling them to fuck off and solve their own problems. And when you have that worldview, of course you're going to look at something like this Where Is Anne Frank movie and think, well, gosh, they're trying to say that the modern refugee crisis is as bad as the Holocaust, and that's terrible, and have no ability to understand, have such an extraordinary cognitive dissonance that you can't understand that. Yeah, no shit, Goofy. Of course, it's not there are different refugee issues that we're dealing with now in the modern world are not as bad as what happened in the Holocaust. Yet, the Holocaust did not happen because a bunch of Nazis showed up and said, "Hi, we're having the Holocaust." No, that didn't happen. It happened because of years and years and years of gradual development toward gradual pushes towards that point. It happened very slowly and very subtly. The National Socialist German Workers' Party was just percolating in the background for years and years before they ever stepped onto the world stage as a political as a threatening political reality. And these things don't just instantly start happening. They develop over time. And the point is that, yes, if Anne Frank had been able to immigrate, she, instead of having to hide in an attic in Amsterdam, she could have very well now been an elderly Jewish woman in New York City, or something like that, which I think would be infinitely preferable. And that's not necessarily saying that we have to take on millions and millions and millions of refugees every time there's a crisis somewhere in the world. We can offer the refugees refuge and then return them to their to their homes once return them to their homes once the crisis is averted, which I dare say many of them would probably prefer and appreciate. But the Daily Wire's worldview is uh, lacks any concept. There's the extreme left worldview is the Karl Marx one world, New World Order, one world kind of worldview, like where it's all one government, all one system, and that is unworkable and has a whole host of problems. Not the least of which is that if a dictatorial force does come into power in such a situation, look at that. You've got nowhere to escape to. That's one of the many problems with that. Pull it around to the Daily Wire, and they represent they have the same blinders on that people on the right have always had, which is again that they want their country under a giant glass dome so they can tell everyone else to fuck off. And neither one of these extremes are workable. We have to be able to coexist with everybody in the world. There's no undiscovered continent left for disagreeable people to fuck off to and start a new country of their own. We have to learn how to get along and work with each other, and part of that does mean helping each other. And so that's what Brett Cooper is missing in all of this. The point of the film, very obviously, and again, I haven't seen the film to know how well they realize this point, but I know that this is the point from reading about it, is that, Anne Frank is not just supposed to be, like, most kids read the Diary of Anne Frank at some point. I read it because it was not assigned to me. I just had this massive crush on Natalie Portman when I was in high school, high school, and so when I heard that she was in a stage performance of the play, the stage play version of Diary of Anne Frank, I went and read it because of that. And I know that's weird and cringy for me to admit. I'm never supposed to admit that I have romantic feelings for any woman. I know that it's wrong for me to feel that way. I don't understand why, but you don't have to tell me that it's cringy and creepy. I get that. I'm not saying that sarcastically. I really do understand. I'm never ever supposed to have those feelings. I'm different and weird and creepy and strange, and I get that. But anyway, that's a side point. The point being, I read it in school, and when I was that age, and the point of the diary, the reason that it is the point of the diary, the reason it has endured for so long and the reason it's so important is because when you are teaching young people about the Holocaust, you can hand them this document that was written by somebody their age at the time that this was happening in real time and make it real for them. It becomes real for them. It's not just something that happened to a bunch of people back then. It's like Stalin had the quote, that the death of one is a death of one is a tragedy. The death of a million is a statistic. Well, having the Diary of Anne Frank and reading it works against that. And it makes it real to you. It brings the tragedy home on a human level because now it is the death of one person that's a tragedy. And that's the point of the diary. And the point that this film is trying to make is that Anne Frank is not just some dry academic subject that you read about in school and forget about. This is something that should change your life and should change how you see the world. So I would not consider, when we talk about things being woke, we're talking about, I think, when we're talking about things being woke, we are talking about a kind of toxic, a kind of toxic mindset and a toxic ideology that has seized onto something that is a valid topic of concern. So, for example, when we talk about, we can talk about like racism in the United States, for example. Yes, the United States has a very unfortunate and very long and very brutal and bloody history with racism. and we need to learn about it. We need to study it. We need to accept it as a part of the United States history and learn from it and learn to be better people. That is true. The toxic perversion of that is the people who come in and say, try to say, oh, we have to say that the United States started in 1619 and reinterpret history, reinterpret the United States as being formed and created specifically for the oppression of black people, even though absolutely none of that is supported by historical evidence. That's the toxic perversion aspect of it. And then with regards to I think most people who are aware of the woke concern don't need more examples. You get where I'm coming from. It's one thing to say, it's reasonable and healthy to say, hey, we should tell stories, we should make movies and tell stories about people from different walks of life and explore the reality of what they go through in their daily struggles and what is life like in this part of the world, or coming from this mindset or this reality. We should explore a diverse array of perspectives and topics. That is a healthy thing. The toxic perversion of it is kind of things like woke casting, race swapping characters for no reason other than fitting diversity quotas, saddling characters in movies with as many ridiculous, not ridiculous, but as many problems as possible to gain diversity approval. So the character cannot. No longer can the character just be struggling. It can't just be a movie about, say, a gay teenager coming out of the closet. It now has to be a movie about a non-binary, transgendered. We have to get all of the woke terminology in there. You get where I'm coming from with that. I think everybody understands. Moving forward with that, I bring that up because this is not just saying that you want to make this movie about tying Anne Frank into problems that exist in the modern world. That's not woke. If we were saying that is not woke Anne Frank. If Anne Frank was being reimagined as a transgender, non-binary black girl, that would be woke Anne Frank. If people were saying that if people were saying that we should read Anne Frank so that as a way of understanding why Matt Walsh is a horrible human being for wanting to deny transgender children access to gender reassignment surgery, that would be woke Anne Frank. If it was a ridiculous, over-the-top perversion of the intention of the intentions of the scope of the Anne Frank project, of publishing Anne Frank's diary, if it was a ridiculous perversion of what that is supposed to accomplish, then it would be woke. But this is not. This is literally saying, think about the fact that the Holocaust really did happen and it could happen again. What can we do to make sure that it never happens again? And that is a totally reasonable question to answer, and something to always, and it's a question that we will never have a definitive answer to. It's something we always have to consider and always have to keep talking about and keep in the forefront of our minds, because we don't want to deal with that again. There's truth in the saying, to secure peace is to prepare for war, to constantly be looking, on the lookout for these trends developing again. And like I said, there is a crazy, toxic, perverted version of that. And Martin Luther King did not give the "I Have a Dream" speech so that college kids, pain in the ass college kids, could get whatever they want all the time by shouting the word racist. That's the woke perversion. This is not woke. This is a very important message, and this is just a new way of conveying a very important message and a very necessary message. So anyway, hopefully that's gotten across.